The coronavirus pandemic has placed extraordinary demands on leaders in business and beyond. The humanitarian toll taken by the COVID 19 creates fear among employees and other stakeholders. The massive scale of the outbreak and its sheer unpredictability make it challenging for executives to respond. In this latest dispatch of Understanding the Future Better, we speak with Hal Gregersen, Executive Director of the MIT Leadership Center and a senior lecturer in leadership and innovation at the MIT School of Management. Gregersen has co-authored 10 books and published over 50 articles, book chapters, and cases on leading innovation and change. His most recent book is The Innovator's DNA: Mastering the 5 Skills of Disruptive Innovators. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. So my question was that do you think that when young startups tend to sort of idolize the likes of Steve Jobs or Musk, they are perhaps looking at the other aspects of innovation and not focusing on the true aspects of these leaders, what it should really be? What do you think is your sense?
Well, for the last 15 years, almost 20 years, I've had the opportunity with Clayton Christensen and other colleagues to actually interview people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And there is a stereotyped view that the media often portray of these people that many times is not reality. So to me, take Steve Jobs as an example. To me, there's Steve Jobs 1.0 and Steve Jobs 2.0. And the Steve Jobs 1.0 is this brash, in-your-face, brutal, insensitive sort of person that just busts his way through every kind of door. And there may be an element of truth to all of that, but remember, he got fired from his own company in 1984, publicly fired. And then he took a decade away when he founded another computer company next that failed. And then he was a part of Pixar, where frankly, the people at Pixar were incredibly smart and brilliant and knew what they were doing. And Steve played some key roles, but they played roles he couldn't play. So to me, over that decade of serious failure, combined with a decade of significant interaction with an incredibly creative company, Pixar, Steve Jobs 2.0, when he went back in the mid-1990s to Apple Computer, was a different Steve Jobs. Yes, he was still intense, but think of his initial hires. He hired people like Tim Cook, who were specialists at supply chains, not these wild-eyed creatives. He paid, and he respected and honored every person's part in the role of a creative enterprise. That was not Steve Jobs 1.0. And so, frankly, the Steve Jobs that these young entrepreneurs might be idolizing is a Steve Jobs that may have been their age in his 20s and behaved the way they thought, but he matured, and as he did, he made a deeper impact. And so my response to the idolization of these people is be very careful of what image you idolize, because they aren't what they're portrayed generally in the media. And now I'm just going to real quickly summarize. It's not just a specific Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk, but if you were to shadow or follow those people on a day-to-day basis, they behave in ways that are different than the rest of the leaders in the world. And that's why they generate an innovation premium that investors believe they'll do new things different tomorrow, and therefore I'll pay you a premium for your stock. And what they do every day is what you started with. They constantly ask questions that challenge the status quo. They watch the world so carefully that a day does not go by that they don't see and notice a surprising thing. They intentionally talk with people who are 180-degree opposites of whom they are, so they can see the world differently and their conversations not the same. They are absolutely unafraid of failure, willing to try and risk and just do something as opposed to think about it. And because they do all of those things, they're capable of divergent associational thinking, which means you connect the unconnected. You put things together that other people don't. So those folks the Elon Musk that we should care about is not the pot smoking Elon Musk. It's the Elon Musk on an everyday basis that's dancing from a rocket ship company to a car company to a tunnel drilling company to a neural implant company. And he's dancing around from space to space, engaging with people in different industries and contexts. And as a result, he can spark and deliver ideas that other people can't. So if the young entrepreneurs of India want to idolize those sorts of folks, don't idolize the stereotype, idolize the behaviors that actually created the positive elements of those stereotypes.
That was so beautifully laid out by you, and thank you so much for that insight. And that brings me to my next question, that Indian CEOs or startups, especially the young founders, have this criticism from a lot of people, especially in the West, and especially VCs, that they are basically known for copy pasting ideas. So everybody's trying to perhaps build the Amazon of India or Uber of India. As these startup founders get on a journey of creating original ideas and perhaps rebuild India as a more product focused nation, where original ideas come from, what should they be the correct mental models of thinking? What are the set of right questions that they should ask to transition from this path to the path that they aspire to be? Because this is a very important phase that this country is going through right now, because there's so much capital chasing these founders, these ideas, but perhaps somewhere there's an obsession to become a unicorn too soon, both from the founder's side and the investor's side. And in that pursuit, the real vision of building an institution which can last for very long is lost. What do you think are the right set of questions that these leaders can ask, the future, your next generation leaders?
Well, I've had the opportunity to interview Narayana Murthy and Nandan Nilekani, who are part of the Infosys startup, founder and co-founder. And so we have to remember that people like Narayana and Nandani, they were once young. I mean, my response is actually going to start with history, which is they were once young. And what they did when they were young is realizing that a traditional educational system wasn't necessarily fostering the kinds of behaviors that they needed to start and build and sustain a creative, innovative company. And so they each had the luxury of either a professor at a university or someone who helped them catch on to the idea that it's the way we act on an everyday basis as a leader that enables us to create a company like Infosys and sustain that innovation. Now I'm going to look at a century-old company in India, Godrej, where it was roughly 15 years ago. We do this innovation premium analysis as part of the most innovative companies list we do with Forbes. And Godrej was not on that list then. In fact, their innovation premium was going down, not up. And it was a combination of some very creative people, including Nisa Godrej, who basically within the consumer appliance area used these discovery or innovation skills in ways they'd never done before. So they went out into the villages instead of sitting in their offices. They went out and learned what were the needs of the people outside of their normal, typical routine. And in the refrigeration area, they ended up creating the Chotaku cooler, which was a smashing success, but it came from being out there with the people, understanding their needs, talking, being challenged, being wrong, being uncomfortable, being reflectively quiet, watching, listening, trying, doing. And that single product ended up becoming a completely different business model that was the start of a decade-long transformation that today, Godrej is one of the most innovative companies in the world, not just India. And so to me, it's a really powerful example of how it might be a startup, or it might be a company with a long legacy. But if leaders of those organizations take it upon themselves to be what we call at MIT, challenge-driven leaders, in other words, I show up at work in the morning trying to find and solve problems that matter. And I'm searching for challenges that are bigger than I am. In other words, I can't figure it out myself. This challenge is so big that it's going to require you and you and you and you. And you're signing up for my startup not because of me, Hal Gregersen, but you're signing up for the challenge that we all so deeply care about, that we're going to use these innovation and questioning skills to figure out a solution. And so you've got someone like Jeff Bezos. Remember, Jeff Bezos was also once a teenager. And when he was a teenager, he went and lived with his grandparents in the summertime, and they lived on a farm. And on a farm, you don't call people to solve all your problems. Jeff learned how to fix tractors. He learned how to take care of animals. He learned that the first solution rarely works. And so by the time he became college age, he had self-defined himself as a relentless problem solver. That's the kind of organization that pushes us on the cutting edge, that ends up creating enormous value.
Wow.
Ed Catmull, who co-founded Pixar and was a good friend of Steve Jobs, to Ed Catmull at Pixar Animation Studios, creativity is problem solving. It's exactly what they do there. They're artists, but they're creative artists because they're problem solvers.
I think that is so well laid out by you. And I like the fact that you just, mentioned these words, that relentless problem solving. We need leaders like that. But often in organization, there could be temptations to believe that we are innovating because there's so much blank noise, because there are different teams, different projects are happening, different products. But at the end of the day, how do you measure that? Are you really innovating? I have seen organizations which tend to be so busy that at least the leaders have this perception that no, we are just doing so much. But at the end of it, nothing is really coming out of it. So where are you on that innovation life cycle, and how tangibly a leader should measure this? And what are the various ways of thinking around that then?
So there's organization, team, and individual, and even societal level ways of thinking and looking at that question. At the organizational level, again, this was about 15 years ago, we tried to figure out what are the most innovative publicly held companies on planet Earth. And we collaborated with Credit Suisse. We then created this innovation premium that's essentially, maybe it's Tesla's share price is 180 US dollars, but it's not. Let's pretend. 100 of that dollars is attributable to their existing businesses. In other words, I'll pay you this much for your existing businesses. But for a company like Tesla or Salesforce or ServiceNow or Amazon, I'll pay a premium of about 70 to 80% beyond what you're currently doing, because I believe you will do something new and valuable in the future. It's no different than two people being hired, both capable of doing today's job well. But if you think one of those individuals you're hiring is capable of helping you generate a new, better, more valuable approach tomorrow, of course you'd pay them more today. That's the logic. And so this innovation premium is a 5-year average. You don't jump on and jump off this list of most innovative companies. You have to have a sustainably creative culture where people are repetitively finding and solving problems, not for problem solving's sake, but to deliver value to the customer. And that's the final piece. So if you walk into Amazon, it's number one, we are customer obsessed. What that means is that the customers are excited about working and being a part of Amazon, period. Now there's a second piece there that's crucial for startups and traditional firms. Being customer obsessed is combined at Amazon with don't trust proxy data. In other words, if I'm the startup founder, if I'm the CEO of a 75-year-old company with 100,000 employees, it doesn't matter. Don't trust proxy data. Because here's the challenge. Walt Bettinger, who's the CEO of Charles Schwab, a global financial services firm, told me isolation is his biggest challenge as a CEO. And he said, the moment I became a manager at a low level in the organization, people stopped telling me things. The higher I got, the worse the isolation problem became. When we get isolated, we trust proxy data, secondary information. If that's the way I'm behaving when I show up at work, I will be finding and solving the wrong problems. I'll be finding and solving the problems that are inside of our headquarters office space that probably have nothing to do with the world out there and our customers, our suppliers, and our clients. And so that's where, if I'm in that isolated box, and if I look at my daily routine and it's signaling that I'm primarily getting secondary data from customers and key stakeholders, then I should be scared to death. I should be getting up, getting out of my chair, getting into the world, going out the door, putting myself in situations where I, CEO, am wrong instead of right. I'm uncomfortable instead of comfortable sitting in my office, and I shut up. I'm reflectively quiet. I listen, I hear, I see, I get surprised, even if it's uncomfortable truth. And if I behave that way, it means that I will start seeing the real challenges. I will start solving the real challenge.
Tell me one thing, Hal. I mean, we are going through an unprecedented situation right now. I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic has been termed as the worst of the worst black swan right now. And of course, the objectives and the shareholder primacy and the conversations that leaders are having with the shareholders, a lot of focus is how do we restore the business? How do we get back to the basics? I mean, it has been a complete washout the last 6 months. I mean, revenues have flattened. The GDP numbers of India have contracted. In situations like this, when leaders are going through, I would say, extraordinary amounts of stress, and there's so much uncertainty, and of course, there's an environment of also mistrust right now. I mean, how do you navigate through all of this? And because if you ask difficult questions, you are being labeled as somebody who lacks empathy. If you ask too soft questions, the shareholders are not happy either. So it's walking a very tightrope from the point of view of a CEO right now. What should you think they should be doing in this environment then?
I think the most important question a CEO in this environment can ask herself or himself is, what am I really solving for? Because if my deepest commitment running a healthcare company is making sure that my healthcare professionals have all the right equipment in order to deliver safe enough service to these patients coming into a hospital, if that's what I'm fundamentally solving for, if that's what I deeply care about, if I ask you a tough question, but my intent is not about my ego, my performance, my stock share increase, whatever. It's about me delivering better service to a patient, then tough questions become acceptable. The point at which tough questions become awkward and unacceptable it's the moment in which those questions are about me. It's about how I look. It's about how our company looks. It's about how we're perceived. That's not the point. That's not why we show up as leaders. We show up to deliver value to those people who have given us their good hard-earned money for whatever service and product we're delivering. And so, I don't think tough questions are the problem. I think the problem is we're often solving for the wrong issue. If it's more politics, in other words, my career, my promotion, my share options, whatever, versus it's about you and your well-being, I think we're in a much better place. And so in this COVID crisis, we are all operating in an environment of such fundamental, unprecedented global uncertainty. That's a given. And so who would have imagined 9 months ago that you and I as adults would be asking ourselves questions like, how do I wash my hands properly? How do I put on a face mask? Do I? How do I clean off the package that's coming to my house? And the list of questions goes on and on and on. How do I do Zoom? How does this camera work? It's just endless. And what I realized about 6 months ago, talking with a colleague at a business school in France, INSEAD, Roger Lehman and I were talking about this, and it's like, we're living in this new foreign country of coronavirus. Roger and I had studied cross-cultural adjustment for decades. In other words, people moving from country to country. They go through this classic adjustment curve. They initially move to a new country, it's a honeymoon effect. Over time, they realize the world isn't what I thought it was, and the things I used to do are wrong, and I have no clue what to do that's right. We call it culture shock. It's often depressing. People want to quit and go home. But if they are relentless problem solvers, if they make the decision, I belong in this new country, I can learn new ways of doing things, they adjust and they succeed, and they can live in that country and be a contributor and contribute in a productive, positive way. So you might be wondering, what on earth does this have to do with coronavirus? It's pretty straightforward. When coronavirus hit, we all got tossed into this new country where our work roles were changing. Most of us, if not all, were working from home, not a workplace. Our work roles were becoming more engaged with our non-work roles more than ever before, and the line became blurrier. Social interaction, it's like if I were to I lived in Finland for 3 years, and if I were to try to talk to someone in Finnish today, it would be impossible. The language is so difficult, and just social interaction is hard. We struggle with just talking with people through this camera. It's like, how can I connect with you? It's the same feeling when I lived in France. How can I connect with these French people? And so what I'm trying to suggest here is, if I'm running a company in the midst of this coronavirus crisis, the first thing I might think to myself is, remember, this is just like going to a foreign country, and we are all still in the middle of culture shock. Because that bottom out period is usually 6 months into an international assignment. That's when it's the worst. Guess what? We're at the 6-month-ish point of coronavirus. People want to quit. They want to go home. They want the world to be like it used to be. They want to just stop and just go back. And the difficulty with the new country of coronavirus is there is no back. We are now navigating new roles, new tasks, and a whole bucket of emotion, positive and negative, how I feel about all of these things going on. And so what I would suggest to people is a simple 3-part checkpoint. My company's struggling with COVID. Have I stepped back to ask myself, what roles are changing and how are we responding to that? What kinds of tasks are people having to unlearn and learn? Are we helping them do that? And at a very fundamental level, how are people feeling? And can they talk about it, and do we? And if we don't have good answers to all 3 of those questions, we will get stuck in that transition process. Most leaders right now are super action oriented. It's like, don't just stand there, do something. We've got all this crisis going on. Reverse that, because if we just stand there and don't do something, we step back, we get perspective, we can actually help people move faster than we could otherwise.
Tough questions will be accepted because often also about the intent. And leaders, perhaps right now, rather than being very action oriented, it's a good idea to step back and get some perspective. And your entire life work, if I may, the kind of books that you have written really centers around this art of asking the correct questions. And you've interviewed so many innovators and the CEOs across your life. But I think we are also going through a very interesting structural shift in the human evolution, if you will, where it's for the first time where people are actually saying that there's a possibility of a human being and a bot working together. And in a country like ours, where there is so much hustle porn, we celebrate hustle. India is supposed to be, right? There are people who like the jobs. I mean, we are all geared towards the very beginning as we were born and we were getting to education that you have to, grow up, you have to work for a particular organization, become a certain thing, at a particular rank. In times like this, when bots are supposedly doing everything, when the future of work is really centered around artificial intelligence, and with so much technology being at the center, and now you have GPT-3, bots are writing beautiful articles and actually telling humans that we are fine with you fighting with each other. I will just be at the back and observing you. Perhaps bots are more capable of asking better questions than humans then. Of course, we have emotional intelligence, but what is it that, that they can't be better leaders? Because ultimately all leaders are relying on data, AI data, or the data given by tech to arrive at the most important decisions. So tech is enabling everything that leaders are doing almost practically these days.
So, couple of responses to that. First and foremost is, I think the greatest human gift we have is the gift of inquiry. Our capacity to ask questions is the key to unlocking opportunity and creative, valuable new ideas. That's what makes us human. If we lose that capacity, we are robots. Now, AI is becoming increasingly brilliant at doing the kinds of things that we humans do. You may have never seen a movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey, where a computer named Hal, my first name, H-A-L, takes over the spaceship and kills the astronauts. So the computer got smarter than the people, out-questioned them, okay? My commitment and my quest is that we as human beings always ask the better question. And in today's world where it's not just theoretical, it's real, we can get neural implants that literally, if we flip a switch, we can get a 20% boost in productivity and focus. And if we flip another switch chemically, we can be 10, 20% more creative. That capacity is already there. It's not theoretical. And so the issue becomes, how are we as human beings going to engage productively with artificial intelligence in order for us to ask the better question always? And what that will take is engaging with artificial intelligence. And so one of the research projects I'm in the midst of is interviewing data scientists who are constantly interacting with AI. And what I'm learning from them is AI is causing them to ask more questions than they ever did before. In other words, their question frequency is going up. When I engage with that computer, I'm asking more questions. And the second part, depending on context, might be, if I'm in cybersecurity, AI is helping me ask bigger questions so that the bad folks can't do what they want to do. If I'm in biogenetics, AI is often helping me ask smaller questions because I'm doing millions of tests a day with AI assistants in order to make progress on the bigger issues. And so my response is not one of fear of AI, but one of understanding. And so if you walk into a place like Zappos, which is owned by Amazon, but it is a completely independent culture that is built around self-contained teams that find and solve problems, you've got their AI data scientists who have figured out algorithms that, like, at an 80%, I believe, plus level, reduce the search time for specific things and the error rates on their website. That's a huge advancement for them. How did that happen? It was they work in an environment that Tony Hsieh, the founder, and others created where creative collisions matter, having autonomy matters, where people step up and step into challenges, and where they're unafraid of AI being able to help them tackle the tough issues. I happened to be interviewing Tony and his team, and when I was there, I walked around the Zappos headquarters, and at one point I noticed this wall that had chalk writing all over it. And I turned to Kristen, my guide, and I said, Kristen, can I write something on the wall? Kristen folded her arms and she looked at me with a smile and she said, Hal, you're empowered here. You can do what you want. I was embarrassed because here's this questioning innovation guy asking for permission to write on a wall that other people obviously had written on. And then it wasn't 5 minutes later that I noticed this sign that you could stick your head through and have your picture taken as a Zappos customer. And I said to Kristen, where do you think a good place to take a picture would be? And Kristen laughed and she said, Hal, you're empowered here. Where do you want to take a good picture? And what I'm trying to say is, even for an outsider coming into the system, their culture is so strong around you're empowered, you make choices, you make a difference. If we create that sort of a culture within our team or even our organization, there's a much higher probability that people will productively embrace artificial intelligence instead of run from it. It can be our friend, not our foe, I guess is how I look at it.
Okay. My last question to you really, Hal, is that if you were to give me like 4 or 5 key trends, for future leaders, what would those really be?
I think the first trend is the one we're talking about. We are in the middle of a massive digitally driven set of changes. COVID has put those changes on steroids where it's moving faster than it ever has before. And this whole domain of digital transformation and change, it was a set of words a year ago for a lot of people. And it's stark, deep reality right now. And we haven't seen anything yet. I mean, we're moving into a completely different digital world. If I'm oblivious to that, I am going to be in deep trouble. Second big trend in the future, we have to pay more attention than ever before to long-term problems. Something like climate change is not going to go away. It's what they call a wicked problem. We're never going to solve it, but we can do something to nudge it, move it into a better place. Long-run thinking is in short-term supply today. But if you walk into these companies that are sustainably innovative over a decade or 2 decades, they always have the long view. And so, given some of these big challenges, climate change, coronavirus is going to sort of go away, but other challenges, probably greater, are going to come along. We live in a world that has natural causes of things we can't control. Get over it. And so it's starting to figure out, how do I as a leader think and act in that long-term way of approaching the world? And the third big challenge is, more than ever before, I believe that this top-down logic of leadership is becoming more and more bankrupt. And I'm speaking from 30 years of seeing that. In 1985, I did research on employee empowerment and engagement. So this was 3 decades ago. We were talking the same talk. And we've pushed it, and we've tried to engage employees, tried to believe they're challenge driven, but the future is that sort of organization. And that's where, if I want to be part of that future, and I'm what I would call a more traditional top-down manager, I'm going to be in deep trouble if the world changes. Because I can be top-down, and I can tell people what to do. If the world, if what we're doing for the world is what they want, and the world doesn't change, that's not the kind of world we're living in. And so I've got to put myself as a senior leader or a mid-level leader in a position where I'm going to be vulnerable, I'm going to be transparent, I'm going to be engaging with all sorts of people inside and outside of my organization. And to me, that trend was theoretical 30 years ago, but it's a practical imperative today and in the future.